And I said, great news. Budweiser have decided that they're going to buy the Che Guevara.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sketchy AF podcast. My name is Jonathan, and joining me today in the show is the legendary Irish illustrator and artist Jim Fitzpatrick. This is an artist that we have mentioned quite a few times here on the YouTube channel in the past, and I am just so grateful to have the opportunity to sit down and have a chat with you. How are you doing today, Jim?
I'm doing good. I'm finished a drawing that I've been working on for a week or two, and talk about a forlorn reason for doing it. Women fighters of 1916 have been totally ignored in the South.
Yes.
But I'm drawing a woman I've drawn Markovitz, who everybody knows, Countess Markovitch. But there's a woman I've always admired called Dr. Kathleen Lynn, and she was a Protestant, a lesbian, a Gael Gore, and a member of Common na Bun, which was like the female wing of the IRA. I'm talking about the 1916 volunteers, nothing beyond that, so we don't get into controversy. And Dr. Lynn was the second in command to Sean Connolly, a very beautiful young man, an actor like Colin Farrell, that kind of look. And they took City Hall, right, which is poorly defended. Now, City Hall is right in Dublin Castle, just beside the gate. And Connolly went on the roof to raise the tricolour, and he was shot by a British sniper immediately. And Dr. Lynn took over, and she became the commanding officer. Eventually, they had to surrender. I mean, they were outnumbered by hundreds to one. They had only about 15 people, I think, 15 volunteers. And she, after imprisonment, she wasn't executed, obviously. She didn't execute women, even though Markovitz begged that she be executed. She didn't want to be left out. And she went on to found, I think it's called St. Ultan's, the very first children's hospital in Ireland. She was in a lesbian relationship for some reason, probably to do with the awful control the Catholic Church had over us. She emigrated to Canada. And when she died in 1966, Eamon de Valera himself carried her coffin, and she had a state funeral, you know. But don't worry, nobody down south has ever heard of her either. But I just think, if you're going to throw a spanner in the works and say, hey, here's a woman, because I've already done Markovitch, who was a spanner in the works, I wanted to pick somebody who kind of reflected today's Ireland nearly.
Yeah.
What, odd years ago,
It's fascinating as well, because you do have, there seems to be a big resurgence at the moment of people trying to talk about these women throughout history in all sorts of cultures all over the world who maybe don't get the credit or the notoriety that they should have. I know there was an English musician recently just released an album where he did it all about famous women from history who didn't quite get the notoriety that they should have for the incredible things that they did. But I always thought when you mentioned about the lady there and being a lesbian and so on as well in that time period, I always think about the time that I'd heard about the first time I encountered Sister Rosetta Tharpe, obviously one of these huge pioneers of rock music. I mean, she's fantastic, but to be in America at the time that she did, being a black woman in a lesbian relationship, playing rock and roll on a guitar the way she did, you talk about someone who's
just... She was a pastor as well.
Yeah, she was, absolutely. And some of the music, obviously, she went on to influence everyone from Elvis and everyone that then he later sort of influenced by his own career. It's just fascinating when you hear these people from history who just...
not ripped off, but let's say he was influenced by her playing. I don't know if he ever said
absolutely, yeah.
I think he acknowledged it. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert. I remember her very early on in my youth on, I think it was Pathé News or somewhere like that.
Yeah.
And she was at a train station somewhere like Warrington, right?
Yes.
With the crowd on the other side.
Yeah.
Like, somebody had built, seats upwards, that whatever you call them, things, like a lecture hall. And they were on one side of the track, and she's on the other side with her musicians playing incredible music.
It is, especially, I've seen the exact video you're talking.
Google it on YouTube.
It's fantastic. Yeah, I've watched that video. I know the exact one you're talking about. It is absolutely fantastic.
Is that in Warrington? Was that where it was?
I'm not entirely sure. No, I just remember watching it and thinking like, oh my God, like this woman's sensational, especially when like she's sensational anyway. And then you think about the politics of the world at the time that she was doing these things, and it just makes it, even more incredible.
Hold on, I have a visitor.
Look, we do. Oh, hello.
He just
One of the things I
on
wanted
a
to
drink
say
of my
there,
coffee.
you're lucky I don't have any near me at the moment. But one of the things I always like to do at the start of every show when I have a guest on is talk a little bit about how I actually came across their work. And it was kind of interesting because when I talk about, like, I grew up obviously always drawn, paint, and art has always been a love of mine. And the first time I encountered your work, I wasn't aware it was your work because naturally it was that Che Guevara image because it was such a
Yeah,
global icon. So I would have seen it long before I actually knew that it was created by an Irish artist. But then when I actually kind of got to know the name Jim Fitzpatrick and to look into your work, it would have been listening to Thin Lizzy albums growing up. I would have, having the interest in art that I did, I would have went through the little album booklets and tried to look up who exactly created the artwork on albums that I loved. And that would have been how I came across your work. And interestingly, then when I looked into you from there, that's when I came across all the Irish mythology stuff. And I probably would have been, I mean, you're talking about 13, 14 years old. And it was a real big kind of moment for me because, you know, we were never grown up educated on Irish mythology. It wasn't something that we had in our school systems. It wasn't something that we
what
get
a
taught.
thing! What a thing to miss out living in
I
on
know.
what hard man.
Exactly. Yeah, without a doubt. You know, I grew up and never even knowing that the name of the city I'm living in is named after one of our goddesses.
A woman, yeah.
And I know it's incredible, but it was never in the education system. It was this sort of, I suppose, hidden little thing that you had to go off and discover that by yourself. And your artwork was actually the reason that I first got turned on to Celtic mythology and went on that sort of mind opening journey of learning all about that. So it was just your work. It was such a transformative thing for me in my life. So it was such a
So
just incredible honor for me to get to sit and have a conversation with you.
I've successfully rotted your mind for life.
I
Che
choose to.
Guevara and Queen Maid.
I would prefer to think of the terms as greatly enriched, but I mean, all right. In fact, actually, right behind where I'm filming on our wall, we have a big sort of A1 of your print, the Maha and Nemid piece. I'd actually sent it over to you recently on Twitter. It was one of the original ones from the 70s, those original prints that were in London. But that is up in our bedroom wall.
That was Motif Editions in London.
Yeah.
And they produced a brilliant set. I think it was 8 colors, some of them they ran to get the printing and the colors right. Because back now I can do better printing than that myself. My son, who lives in the States, runs my website. He has an A1 machine. It's the size of a small Volkswagen. I have an A2 one. So, and the quality coming out, it's like if you're an artist and you've lived as long as I have.
Yeah.
You looked at your work coming out in so many different formats, most of them crap. You know what I mean? To see this quality, it's like, whoa.
It is so interesting because when you think about, obviously everyone would be aware of that kind of the red and black and white iconic Che Guevara image that you created. And not too many people, I suppose, unless they look into it, are aware that there are other variations of that poster. And I think that because I remember I didn't know for such a long time, and then I came across the other versions that you had, the black and white ones, and that psychedelic one that you're talking about. And they're incredible, those pieces too. The detail that goes into it, they're in many ways, I think they're probably more detailed than that black and white image. You have so much work that goes into the face, and even I remember one of them, the eyebrows are so intricately illustrated in it.
The very first one. That's again,
it's fantastic.
I call it a psychedelic shade, but it was very primitive because I was learning at a huge rate. I was working in advertising, some of the smartest minds you could imagine. A lot of them had left England and Europe after the Second World War and come here, especially all the Dutch and Belgians. And they brought with them a knowledge of printing technology that we didn't have. It's called gravure printing. I loved it. I did many ads using gravure. I even did a portrait of Michael Collins on the anniversary of his murder, where the independent full page front page in gravure color. It's like digital color today. It's beautiful. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that was the only process and was highly expensive. Everything else was called lithograph, 4-color lithograph. So you had to pull many tricks to sort of get the right color tones, the right everything. And sorry, cat, what's your fucking doing?
There's a wild cat running around the place.
Oh, he is. He's like a bobcat. He's half wild, half savannah, sphinx mixture, something like that. You know, the only time I ever
2 cats coming soon, so we'll be getting used to the chaos that cats bring.
Well, this guy's hyper. Now he's been sleeping for hours, so he's hyper. And my daughter's here, and she has him wound up, and she's here. And now I'm on my own with him, and he's waiting to be wound up. You know. But where are we? Che Guevara, the first one. The very first Che image I ever did going back historically, was in 1967 in April for a magazine called Scene Magazine, which I was art director of. They couldn't afford to pay me very well, so they would give me, I would do a page illustration or a page cartoon. I would get a 3-page ad, which I'd use posters. So I was doing a series called A Voice in Our Time, which is 1-page editorial cartoons, very influenced by people like Jared Scarf and Ralph Steadman, who and still do. So the first one I did was a Vietnam War commentary with Harold Wilson, the British Prime Minister, and US President Lyndon Baines Johnson. I was prophetic when you consider Bush and Blair, because I had Lyndon Johnson with Harold Wilson on a leash as a poodle for American imperialism, right? Then the second one, I can't remember the second one that's gone out of my head right now. It wasn't Ian Paisley, he was third. I know it was an anti-American one, but the fourth one in April of that year, March, April, was supposed to be this one I did of Che, but it was much more political. Now, the editor, a lovely Englishman called Norman Ames, and he took one look at it and went, oh, not a chance, because I put up on top, wherever death may find us, and it's all about the clatter of machine guns and everything. We're not having that now. I could understand it. I've never had any problems with him. A Northerner, Herbie Brennan, was the editor, and he was the same. But to be fair to them, a year later, they wrote in the magazine about how Herbie felt like the guy who turned down the Beatles, because at that stage, even the Che was really everywhere. Yeah. You can't call it viral in those days, but it was proliferated deliberately by me. With the help
viral before viral was a thing, without a doubt.
But you couldn't make this up. I decided that this was before Che was, this is when Che moved into Bolivia to start the revolution with no support, cut off by the Russians from even the Bolivian Communist Party, rejected the whole idea. They were all military dictatorships. The consequence would have been severe on the population.
Yeah.
Especially the indigenous. But he went ahead anyway and started a revolution. And in Stern magazine, a German magazine we got in the agency I worked in, because they used to get magazines from all over the world, they were our way of reference. Artists have a thing called reference. In other words, you're only as good as your reference. If you want to take a picture of the Pope, you need a good reference. Simple. And I hadn't got a great reference of Che when I did the first one. It was from a blow up from a demo in Paris, So that first one, I worked in an agency. I made a poster of that when Che was executed, of the black and white one. Keep in mind the cat there. Automatically keeps it up. It's about to knock off or something. It's a box.
The cat wants to be the center stage.
No, he's just bored. Probably listen to me rattling on. But anyway, get my thoughts together. I was working in an advertising agency. Che had been executed, and it turned out very brutally. I wrote a review of his guerrilla diaries in kind of a very lefty Irish fortnightly called Hibernia. And I made phone calls to Bolivia and France, and I got the exact manner of his murder from a French reporter called Michel Roy. I've never actually told anybody this. It's not even in any biography. I'm just remembering.
Wow, a wee bit of an exclusive. There we are.
Yeah, Michel Roy. I'm pretty sure that was his name, R-O-Y. And she had gone to Bolivia, and she had worked out exactly who did what to whom. And she was the one who disclosed that a young man called Mario Terran, I'll come to him in a minute, had been ordered by Felix Rodriguez, the CIA rep, who's still around, still alive, still has Che's stolen Rolex, which I asked him to give back to the family.
Yeah.
Just, we all make mistakes when we're younger. He sent Mario Terran drunk in to execute Che. Che looked at him and said, be a man and just shoot. And he was ordered not to shoot him in the face, because the CIA wanted his head, literally. And he shot him in the chest. Didn't do a good job. So they had to bring the doctor in to shoot him. And he drowned in his own blood, right?
Wow.
And nobody knew that. I published all that in the magazine here. And to be fair, the editor said, we could have our ass sued off on this. You're naming names, just your other CIA operatives who I named. And I've spoken to one or two of them even since. But it was the manner of his murder that outraged me and made me do all the posters subsequently. I did
Yeah.
one in black and white, the one you're referring to, but it was the Scene magazine page with, uniformated. At the time, I was a big fan of New Yorker magazine. There's two of them, New
Yeah.
York, New Yorker. New Yorker is the more literary one. They had a cartoonist called Al Hirschfield. And I don't think I've said this either, but Al Hirschfield always put his daughter's name, Nina, in the cartoon, in her hair somewhere. And I used to always, New Yorker, once I got the Hirschfield page, I'd be going like, where is it, where is it, where is it? And that's what led me to start including little things like that in the artwork, because I realized, hold on, how do I prove I ever did this in years to come? Because I was determined to make this viral. Goodbye.
Hello there.
And at that time, working in advertising age, you couldn't make this up. The two bosses were very, I don't want to call them right-wing, but one of them had been very right-wing during the war. And the other one was, what's the word for it? One of these Catholic associations, one of the Knights of Columbanus. And they were starting a new agency that I was part of. So they used their new PR department to promote the poster, right? Simply because the tagline always said, Jim is an art director of Wilson Art and Advertising at Lansdowne Road, Dublin. You know what I mean?
Okay.
That made it proliferate at no cost to me at all. It was in every newspaper everywhere in here, and a lot of them in the UK as well.
Yeah.
So you can't make that stuff up. They were as right-wing as you get, But business is business as far as they were concerned. And here I was getting them publicity. So that poster was advertised in Scene magazine. I have the pages from it still, and one or two other magazines. Well, Newsight, Vincent Brown had a magazine back then. But long story cut short, I was asked then, I was invited to participate in the 1968 Viva Che exhibition in London by a guy called Peter Meyer. And I sent over the artwork for it was a photo montage. I didn't realize I still had the artwork of the very first Che. And, oh no, hold on. Yeah, I sent over that artwork, but it was a photo montage with some real artwork painted on it to add to it. I sent over a canvas, especially did, of Che, the same image from that photograph, but by now, when I get to it, I'm coming to a much better version of the photograph. This is the Corda photograph, When I did and black and white Che, it was after his murder, but the red and black one was for the Viva Che 1968 exhibition to be in the it started off in the Arts Laboratory, which is where John Lennon met Yoko Ono, for instance, because I was over there at the time. I used to go to it. I loved it. So they agreed to put on this Viva Che exhibition. I never had any involvement. It wasn't my show. So I did the red and black one for that. But the red and black one would have been done before Christmas because, I knew I had to get this over. I shipped it over with the artwork, with the paintings, with the canvas, a big canvas, I think it was 40 by 40 by Beverly Smith. I've since asked them for records, but they never came back to me. I'd love to just have records of everything, It'll be there. And that went over, and I never saw it again. I was told that the exhibition had been cancelled and that it was going on in the Listen Gallery, a very reputable gallery back then. You know what I mean? And that was it. My phone calls were never returned. Now, to ring UK in those days cost about £25 for a 10-minute call. And I rang this guy who was ringing me nonstop before that, Peter Meyer. Never heard another word. He used to write for Studio International, an art magazine, so he was real. But that whole exhibition vanished without trace, including my originals. But luckily, I'd never given them the original for the black and white, for the red and black.
Yeah.
The more sort of linear line version. I had a machine called a Grant that I made photocopies of everything on, and paper negatives, black paper negatives, right?
Yeah.
And you simply put them under light and they became positives, And it was only a couple of years later, like I think around the 2000, the people started getting really interested in all this. I've an attic full of stuff, Lizzy stuff I've never seen since I did it. You're just buried. You have to wade through all this stuff. And books, everything up there, because I had to move house in a hurry, and everything went up in one big lump.
Yeah.
My son has done heroically when he comes back from America, going through it and sorting it out. He loves it. But anyway, I have the original artwork of the Che in my possession still, thank God, But in that Che, I built in a hidden logo. I can tell you because it's not hidden anymore. I was outed by Michael Casey of the Wall Street Journal, who was writing a book called Afterlife about the Che Guevara image.
Yeah.
He was most interested in a thing called the Warhol Che, which I'll get to in a minute. And I explained to him the reason I knew the Warhol Che was using my work. I said, I have a hidden logo built into it. I have other things too. One
Yeah.
never will, unless I have to go to court. But my son sound. Because you have to prove you did these things.
Yeah.
You did it. I know I did it. What's the problem? But you've seen my painting of Queen Maeve, or Mocha and Nemeth. What happens if somebody comes along and said, no, I did that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? My name is on it.
Uh-huh.
People can be weird. I've seen work stolen by artists. I mean, Banksy is a good example. There's a couple of big forgeries of his going around that I don't get.
Yeah. There's a lot of them, actually, yeah.
It's easier to forge that. Well, the Che would be very easy to forge too, as it turned out. But long story cut short, I never got that back. And months later, that was March, I sent it over. July, August, I would have been in London because I had posters I was selling. Right, I went to a company called Big O, Felix Dennis, who ran Maxim magazine. He owned Maxim magazine much later.
Uh-huh.
Felix told me that when he wanted to distribute it under Big O Posters, a very important poster company back then, that he was told by a man called Fetronelli that he owned the copyright and that I was violating his copyright. Okay, so that killed my Che on the spot.
Uh-huh.
He showed me a poster of a photograph by Corda. I didn't know, never heard of Corda until, I think it was 2000 before I realized who did it. I thought it was another photographer called Salas, who was did a lot of Cuban photography, a brilliant photographer. I'd heard of Corda, but I had no idea who he was. I knew Corda was a film director many years ago that it turned out he'd taken the name from.
Uh-huh.
When I was doing the red and black one, I was working in the same agency called Wilson Hartnell with a man called Ott Picard. And he was best friends with a man called Jacques Tejeur. And Jacques Tejeur, they both were Dutch young men who'd come to work in Ireland. But I was working with Ott. And through Ott and Jacques was a member of what's called the Provost. Now, you know what the Provosts are. These are not the Provosts.
Different ones, yeah.
Totally different, long before the Provosts, The Provosts are half as much fun as these guys. Ireland would be united by now, No, they were crazy anarchists, They followed Herbert Marcuse and all that kind of stuff, and Chairman Mao. And they were quite nuts, actually. One guy was called Johnny the Self-Kicker. Another guy drilled a hole in his head to let the air in. I mean, they were fucking mad, No. But anyway, they had a magazine called Provo, I think it was, or something like that. And John, I have to put about it. I
think the cat didn't like the mention of the word provost, maybe? Oh, no.
He's a pacifist. But this is the crazy bit. He got in touch with the Provost because he said they had a photograph of the image that I'd seen and tried to use.
Yeah.
But it was so poor quality, it was full of dots. When you blew it up, you could barely see what the hell it was. And he said they have a perfect picture of Che, right? So he got hold of that and sent it to me. I did my drawing from that, right, and gave it back. Do you know who it came from? Jean-Paul Sartre. It's like Monty Python, this Mr. and Mrs. Sartre. See Monty Python, Jean-Paul. But anyway, Jean-Paul Sartre, it turned out, had been with that man I mentioned, Fetronelli, in Cuba, right? And went to Corda's studio. And Corda, being the generous man he is, gave him copies of the photograph. Sartre had his, lent it to the Provost for their magazine, got permission, lent it to me. I sent it back. In those days, you couldn't transmit stuff. It was all post.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? People don't understand how difficult these simple things are. I just go on Google now, I can find what I want. You know, even Kathleen Lynn that I finished drawing, all from Google photographs.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, otherwise I'd have to go to our relatives, probably track them down and fucking try to photograph it. You know, knock on the door. They can have a picture of your granny or whatever. If you have relatives, they're now in touch with me, but that's another bloody story. Ireland is a small place. Long story cut short. Sartre and Feltrinelli took the photographs. Sartre kept his, Feltrinelli published his, and on the poster I'm being shown by Felix Dennis, it says on the bottom clearly, and there's a record of this in loads of places, Libera Feltrinelli, right? Copyright Feltrinelli's library. And if you go to the Duomo in Milan, where my daughter lives, I go there all the time, opposite is the Feltrinelli bookshop, same guy. He was a rich kid, who's a rich anarchist, whose family supported him while he went to Bolivia to interview Regis Debray, who'd been captured. I won't get into that. And he was also involved in the publication of Che's diary, I think, you know, the real one, as opposed to the one the CIA forged when they captured him, you know?
Yeah.
But Petronelli was later, I believe, suicided. He was involved with the Red Brigades and he was blowing up the entire electricity system in Turin with a satchel bomb.
Yeah.
Boom, and he's gone, you know. I spoke to him. He kind of threatened me in a funny way because it wasn't, I don't want to describe him as hostile, but when he tracked me down, he rang me. I lived in Baldoyle at the time, in the middle of nowhere. And he said at the end of it, I have two choices. I can either, what was it? Death or law. And I said, I hate law. I'll take death. I laughed, and that was it. I figured he's hardly going to follow it up, you know. I mean, you know, it wouldn't
didn't
get rid of it if you're a fucking Italian anarchist. You know what I mean? It's not that. You know, I was working with the official movement at the time, so I could have called on half an army if I needed to.
Yeah,
pacifist, you know. That was before the province were even formed, and the officials had gone on ceasefire and were now a political movement, terrified by the government. Sorry, the government were terrified of them so much that we were all special branch and all the usual shite, you know. We were getting involved in housing and housing action and occupying houses in Dublin. Right, this is like 68, 69. We were serious, you know, and they were terrified of that, you know. So that's why Haughey and the gang formed the Provost with the rest. We'll go into the details, but it was a difficult time to be doing something so political, working in advertising with very right-wing religious people.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. When I did the first Che poster, I sold it into different outlets in Dublin. One of them is a very posh shop called Brown Thomas, right? They had a gallery downstairs before they went too posh. And that gallery ordered 25 copies of the poster after they sold out the first 25. And a woman came in, paid for them all, bought the whole lot, and tore them up on the spot. Never knew who that woman was, never found out. But the other great story was Mr. and Mrs. King, who ran a bookshop called Parsons Bookshop in Baggot Street Bridge, a very famous bookshop back then. Up in their front window, right? She was a lovely lady. She used to have Paddy Kavanagh sitting in the corner having his cup of tea, talking to nobody, the grumpy old bastard, hiding from Brendan Behan, who lives around the corner as well. You know, he was always drunk and angry. And this is the kind of world I grew up in as a young man working in advertising. At lunch hour, I'd go down to Parsons and she'd let me go through graphics annuals and things I couldn't afford, you know?
Yeah.
But she put up a poster of Che in the window to try and help me because she loved helping struggling artists. And somebody came along and threatened to put a brick through it, you know? And when she was telling me this, I said, oh, listen, I'll take it down. I'm really sorry. I don't want to get you into fucking trouble over this.
Aye.
I wouldn't have used the F word with her around. It would have clipped me. Anyway, she said, no, we'll leave it there. I don't like being told what to do.
Funnily enough, when I was talking about the Jailbreak album cover from Thin Lizzy, it was quite an interesting one because that would have been, the album cover actually caught my attention because I would have grown up with a great love of American comic books. And when I seen that album cover way back when I did, it gave me very striking resemblances to famous Marvel comic illustrator Jack Kirby, because I remember seeing that album cover and instantly I thought about Galactus, the character. And that came through big time in the work. And it was only much later then that I discovered that you had that love of comic book and artists like Jack Kirby themselves. Was that something that was very intentional when you were creating that piece?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Myself and Philip are huge Marvel Comics fans. Jailbreak was loosely based on a Marvel comic called Killraven, mostly with Arthur Craig Russell, and you see some of that influence in the inside color image of the guys running away from this jail with tripods blowing up around them. And that influence of Jack Kirby, and also I should mention Neil Adams, both deceased now, God rest them, but I knew both, but I certainly knew Jack a lot better. And he loved my work, but I had the pleasure of telling him that the very first letterhead I think I ever made for myself in 1968, I think 69, was Galactus himself with a big speech bubble and him up against it, and based entirely on Kirby, but drawn in my kind of quasi psychedelic style of the time. Excuse me, style I still love, by the way. But I met Kirby many years later. I must show you, where is it, if I can find it. I have a business card from him, my business card with his name and address on the back in his handwriting, where himself and Roz, his wife, who met me in San Diego, we were guests of honor, the two of us. He was a greater guest of honor, of course, than I was. But he was a most, what's the word for a charming man, obviously very knowledgeable. He was a GI during the war. He knew his stuff. And when I was introduced to him, I was by Mike Kaluta and somebody else. He said, "Oh, this is the young man we've heard so much about." I was young then.
Yes. I mean, that's quite good that people of that level obviously hearing about the work. And because you mentioned being over in San Diego, you had actually mentioned recently. We were in a bit of a back and forth there on Twitter maybe about a month or so ago, and I happened at the time to have tweeted out about the passing of John Romita Sr., credible artist, and you had replied under it. You had mentioned that you met him over at one of the comic book conventions when you were doing San Diego Comic Con. What was it at the time when you went over to San Diego Comic Con? Was it just a case of you went over as artist Jim Fitzpatrick, or was there anything in particular that you were kind of promoting or presenting at the time?
A friend of mine, also a comic book legend, Jim Steranko. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Great innovator of comic books who moved everything forward. He wasn't a superb technician like Neil Adams or as dynamic as Jack Kirby, but he was wonderful. And he did all the changeover of Captain America into this kind of quasi mystical Dali esque style. If you ever see any of his covers, their graphics are amazing. Well, Saranko and myself were guests of honor at a convention in Birmingham. And we hung out together. He was great fun. He was a magician, he was an escape artist, and he was a really interesting character, a Renaissance man. And he arranged for me to be invited to San Diego as a guest, right? So I didn't have to pay for anything. I wouldn't have had the money to bloody fly to San Diego. A 17-hour journey. And I got there anyway. They put me up in this Emerald Hotel you can see from the sky. It's got an emerald shape. I can't remember the name of it, but it's a big one and a beautiful one. And while I was there, I had a minder, a very beautiful girl, who's still a friend of mine. She became a Hollywood stunt artist afterwards. And I just had a wonderful time with nice, interesting people. I hung out mostly with Mike Kaluta, Brett Anderson, and Dave Stevens, of course, who created Rocketeer. Again, another young man died far too early, a lovely character. And they introduced me to everybody because I was in their van, and Brett had a van that was carpet or fur lined on the inside. It was really bizarre. I know. And I got to know so many great people. I caught up with people I'd known and corresponded with for years, like Bud Plant, who was the distributor. He took all my books and everything. I just had a magical time. I loved it. And I was over a couple of times. They eventually made me a permanent guest of honor. I have a certificate to that effect if I ever want to go back.
Wow,
To
that's another nice little accolade to add to the long list that you have at this
yeah.
point. Anyway,
Well, that stuff matters to me. The others don't. You know, that sort of accolade is something you share among your peers. The first time I was there and I got up that morning, I sat down at a table and I was talking to some people I'd met previously who were kind of you get a minder. But I was at a table with Jack Kirby and Bern Hogarth. Burne Hogarth was the Tarzan artist, right? He was known as Michelangelo of the comic book by the Louvre Museum, who had a big exhibition of him only about 2 years before. I thought he'd be long gone. I used to get his work in charity packages delivered to the house myself and my mum stayed in as lodgers. They came from America, from Chicago, and you got the Chicago Tribune and the comic pages, and on the back of them was a full page in full color of Tarzan by Burne Hogarth. I have book of all that now, but I don't have the originals. They were magical.
That's incredible. Well, one of the things, again, when I'm talking about everything that I've done up here on this YouTube channel, it all initially began when I started to kind of chart my journey getting back into art. Art was always a love of mine my entire life. And then after kind of working professionally as a graphic designer for a little while, I kind of lost a little bit of that love for a while. And just this year, I've been rediscovering that love and getting back into art again. So one of the things that I love speaking to guests when they come on to the show is a little bit about their art journey and how they came across art. Now, I would suspect, obviously, Thomas Fitzpatrick was your grandfather, very famous Irish political cartoonist here. So I'm assuming art was something that would have been present in your life just from way before you even could remember.
It was thanks to my mum. My father, who was Thomas Fitzpatrick's son, abandoned us when I was 5. He had a bit of a binge drinking problem and a gambling problem and gambled away millions in today's money. So, as my mother said, she was left with 2 and 6 in her arse pocket. It's about 15p these days. And I won't go into all my life story from that point, but let's say art was scarce on the ground, but she kept me informed. I was very lucky. She had 5 books left over from my grandfather's immense library. One of them was Doré's illustrations, all the complete works of Gustave Doré, a Victorian engraver and artist, magnificent. And I used to copy all that. But it was only when I started going to school and in every school I went, it was the same story. In St. Pat's from Condor, where I went to school, I was caught illustrating a comic book version of a film called The Robe, the story of the crucifixion with Victor Mature. Right? I can remember it so vividly. And I did a comic book version, and the teacher, Mr. Klein's a very kindly man, stopped me and said, "What are you doing?" Right? It was in Gaelic or Irish class or something like that. And I said, "Nothing, sir." And he said, "Let me see that." And he took it up and he looked through it and he went, hmm, hmm. Carry on, Fitzpatrick.
Oh, yeah, well, that worked out quite well, I suppose. That could have went one or two ways, but there we are.
I still have that comic. It's ridiculous. On brown paper, the crappiest paper you could find. We'd nothing. And it was just, I was always drawing. And when I went to secondary school, I became editor of the college magazine. So I could do the middle page spread of cartoons, mostly based on Mad magazine, which I collected at the time. I loved Mad magazine. And the covers for sort of sports events and stuff, they're all crap, but at least I got to do them. Some of them, one or two of them are actually good. Most of them are rubbish. But no, I grew up in Drumcondra and I was very lucky. On my way into town, I'd stop over. I was only talking to what's the word for somebody who's involved with these things now and making decisions about art
Yeah.
in the Hugh Lane Gallery. And it was then called the Municipal Gallery of Art. And as I passed by, I always went in for a quick look because inside the door was the stained glass window by Harry Clark called the Geneva window. Now, I won't
Yes.
bore you with it because they sold it for.
I'm a massive fan of Harry Clark's work, actually. I absolutely one of the greatest illustrators. I had a kind of anytime I learned about anything that was a particular art movement, which we would have done whenever we were studying art history, we would have went through all the different art movements. And when I came across any art movement that I liked, I would have always tried to see if there were practitioners from Ireland who would have worked in that style. And I remember coming across Art Deco and Art Nouveau, and it was a style of art that really, really I was drawn to. The illustrative style of it was very, very eye catching. So I went and looked up what Irish artists would have worked in style. And at the time, the artist that I really came up, it would have been the first person that really came up at that time would have been Harry Clark, because it wasn't a tremendous depth of Irish artists who would have been in that sort of Art Deco style, but his work came up, his stained glass window work. And he was one of those people that I had just an incredible love of. And it wasn't actually until much years later that I found out that he was a big influence on you. And once I knew it and had those two pieces, it made sense. I could see that influence in your work, but I didn't quite put them together back then. It was much later that I seen that link there. But incredible artist, absolutely fantastic.
Well, I was very lucky. We had this gallery on the way that I could pop into and see the Geneva window. which unfortunately had led to Clark's death because he was suffering from TB. He was trying to finish all this work, was commissioned for the League of Nations. And because in the myth of Deirdre of the Sorrows, she's wearing a see-through veil, Lara decided it was far too raunchy. And then when Cosgrave came in, they refused to even pay him or his widow. So don't get me going on that. And then, to add insult to injury, when the Municipal Gallery of Art had it in their collection, they were asked to buy it by David Clark, Harry Clark's son. I was a friend of Michelle Clark, his granddaughter, who used to sell my posters, incidentally. And David Clark offered that Geneva window to the National Gallery, sorry, to the Municipal Gallery of Ireland and to the Irish nation for 100 grand. And they refused. So it's now in Pensacola, Florida, where I have to buy the West Palm Beach. And then
I remember reading that it was over in Florida too. It's so strange that you wouldn't have something like that stay in Dublin. Absolute shame.
that's the last time I saw it. I had to go to Florida to see it as a goodbye, after all the influence it had on me. I just wanted to give it one last look. And they have no regard for that kind of work here. The only reason he's in the National Gallery of Ireland is because a very generous businessman, Lachlan Quinn, gave us all the illustrations from one of the actual art illustrations from one of Clark's books. They have the complete collection. But all Clary Clark's work was being sold off at that time, and I wanted to get Walpurgis Night, in his masterpiece, but I hadn't got 2,600 for it. That's all they were looking for. You know what I mean? Scandal.
That's unbelievable. Absolutely. He's one of those artists too that his reputation seems to have grown more in recent times. He wouldn't have been an artist that really got the credit that he deserved for a very long time, but there does seem to be, I would regularly see some of his work pop up with other Irish illustrators that I would follow on social media. So there does seem to be a little bit of a resurgence of an interest in his work and people appreciating the stuff that he did. Sadly, it wasn't there for a very long
There's
time.
a new Japanese book on his work out, everything he's ever done. Wait there, I'm going to show it to you.
Uh-huh.
You can get it in the National Gallery of Ireland. That's where I got mine. But this has to be seen to be believed. Now, this is a Japanese book. Look at this, It is all metallic. It is magnificent. And, I won't go into all the stuff, but you can see it's all Clark. You could open up a page and it's magnificent, And well worth it. And I think it was 34 euros. And it's his complete works. You wouldn't get an Irish publisher, an English publisher publishing a book like that. And in Ireland, there's still this anal attitude they have towards anything that's vaguely representational or illustrative. So you have to get through all that web of nonsense as well. So I don't bother. Short answer.
So one of the things that I did want to check in, then moving obviously as your career progressed, I know obviously a lot of people will have come across your work for the first time, much like I did when they came across those album covers for Thin Lizzy. But I do remember seeing once that you had mentioned that prior to the work that you did with Thin Lizzy, you had a little bit of involvement with Led Zeppelin. Was that correct? That there was work you were doing there that didn't quite go to fruition, but it led in?
Yeah, I was working. I was Alan Aldridge, a very famous British artist who did all the great Sunday Times covers, Penguin covers. He was the great psychedelic artist at the beginning of that era, about 1969. And he started a company called Alan Aldridge Associates. And he contacted me, which I was like, Jesus, I was stone broke at the time. We were in the middle of the petrol crisis where you had to queue for petrol. The economy was collapsing and there was no work at all. And I had a family to feed. Anyway, I flew over to London and Alan asked me to join his agency. He'd just done the Beatles Illustrated Songbook. He's a friend of George and John. And I started working for Polydor Records. I did Planksty album cover and Tom Newman, the composer who was the producer of Tubular Bells for Mike Oldfield. I was working for a lot of really good bands. At the same time, I had just done about a couple of months, about half a year before, the first Thin Lizzy album cover, Vagabonds of the Western World. So I was approached by a contact who was a friend of John Paul Jones, who was Irish, to do a rough design for imagery for their stationery, right? And for an album cover, which they had as yet untitled, but it was to be epic. So I did a beautiful letterhead for them, right? Which I have, I think it's on my websites, or it's certainly on my social media. I put it up every now. And I did a cover for the album that turned out to be Houses of the Holy. But I had a guy on a flying horse with wings, a spear in his hand, charging into this Jack Kirby sort of sun. That's the only way to describe it, exploding in all directions. It was kind of mind blowing, you know. But I love Zeppelin, you know. But it never came to anything. And then I was worked immediately then for a band called Hackensack, and they were a big band at the time. They were metal as well. And Philip took me to one side and said, Jim, uh, we were up in Sheffield, and there was a backing band called Hackensack, and they had all their graphics done by my artist. And I went, okay. He said, would you mind not doing that again? Just work for us, and I'll look after you. And to be fair, he did. He always got me a good deal.
Yeah, it's so interesting because obviously one of the things that I kind of thought when I was looking over different bits of information and preparing for today and sitting down and having the conversation with you, obviously you get instantly drawn into that Che poster, and you do think about, you're speaking to an artist who has created an iconic piece of imagery, something that will be known all over the world. But you could definitely make the argument that those Thin Lizzy album covers are just as iconic. These are things that will be known all over the world. These are things that will be known by generation after generation after generation of people who come along and discover this music. And it was kind of interesting because one of the things, I can't remember where I seen it recently, but it was something that I heard and it stuck with me in my head. And it was someone describing this, the human condition in their mind could be described as a person's internal conflict where they are desperately trying to survive, to not die, and on the other side having the knowledge that one day that's something that is inevitable, that will happen. And so we try to attain immortality in all these different ways. And it's kind of interesting because through your artwork, I think you could go without any hesitation and say that that is something that you've managed to achieve, not just with the Che Guevara work that everyone knows, but those Thin Lizzy album covers. As people go on to discover them generation after generation, this is artwork that's going to live on and on and on. Is that anything that you ever get an opportunity to really sit down and consider yourself? Because I understand when you live through something and when you're the person on that end of it, perhaps you don't see it with that perspective because you were in it. Do you have moments where you get to sit down and really think and consider just how much of an impact that work has had?
Oh, I do. And the reason I do is very simple. About 2007, I think I had cancer. Now, I'm one of these fit fuckers. I played football till I was 68, right? When I got it, it was only about 5 years after I'd finished, and I was as fit as you could get. I was cycling every day. But cancer is a gift if you survive it. It's not much if you don't, but it's a gift. It cuts out all the bullshit. I tell you what it did do, and I don't want to get into particularly here, it radicalized me. God, my sense of injustice, people is vehement now, where before it would be gentle. I watch, and we're living in the richest country in the EU right now, and we have 12,000 homeless families, families being evicted like during the Great Famine. I could go on a rant, I don't want to bore everybody, but I have been radicalized by it. So much so that I've done nearly all the 1916 signatories. No, I've done all the signatories and a lot of the other, uh, what's the word for it? People who are on in that period, like Markovitz, Roger Casement, Kevin Barry. I've just finished, I could show if she's around somewhere, Dr. Lynn, who is a lesbian woman fighter for the IRA and the volunteers. In those days, nobody called them the IRA. They were the volunteers, you know, so we should make that distinction. And she was with Sean Connolly, a beautiful looking young man, looked a bit like young Colin Farrell, who was an Abbey actor who led the command to take City Hall from the British Empire, who shot a poor old police who was trying to stop him, right? Not a nice thing to do because his family still remember it. We're all still around, don't forget, just at different generations. And he went up on the roof to check into Dublin Castle. It overlooks Dublin Castle, and his sniper shot him through the head. When the sniper shot him, Dr. Kathleen Lynn, a very posh, upmarket young woman, a qualified doctor, took over command, and she became the first commander involved in fighting right, from Common Amon, the Irish women's side of the volunteers, like Markovitz. She went on then to found St. Ultan's, the first children's hospital, with the help of Markovitz as well. It gave away her entire fortune to the poor of Dublin, don't forget, you know. And she was the first woman to really draw attention to all the different diseases. I can't remember the three of them. Diphtheria. I had TB, so I went through all that. Diphtheria, pneumonia, TB. There was a whole list of all these killer diseases. I mean, stop short with typhus, you know. And she eventually, being lesbian, had her partner and herself. I presume because Ireland was so Catholic and run by the church, they took over. We threw out the British and fucking church took over, you know, great. And when she died in 1966, her body was brought back to Ireland for a state funeral, and De Valera himself carried the coffin, you know. But I think I want to memorialize the more ordinary of the women fighters, and there were many of them, you know. So I've just done that one, not as a token, but because I need to, you know. So that's what I'm at the moment. But I've done an awful lot of political work since I had cancer. I've been working for the Palestinian. I got an award from the Palestinian people. I've worked for the Kurdish government in exile for Abdullah Öcalan, who's in jail for 500 years, along with another man, Maram Baghouti, who I did to stop a hunger strike exploding into violence. I tried to help him get a deal with the Israelis, which he did. And I think Haaretz covered the fact that I was involved, and I think that helped. I don't think the Israelis liked the spotlight from someone in my position looking at what they were doing to Palestinian prisoners. All they wanted was rights to see their families, rights to have visits, rights to read newspaper, rights to watch television, rights to medical treatment, which they weren't getting and still aren't, right? And I saw what happened with the hunger strikes here. We had a bloodbath. People were killed on both sides and all sides. And I'm a pacifist. I didn't want to see that. So his wife, Magda, who's a lawyer herself, came over to Ireland and I was taken out for dinner. And that's my reward. Money can't buy that. So I do a lot of that kind of work. And the same, if you look at my track record up in Northern Ireland, right through the war, I never supported violence. But you'll find that I did a book, Pritchin, for the U, which was published by the UDA. That gets people going, including some notable names at the moment. I was about to mention some, but back then Johnny Adair threatened me because the book cover was in the front of the UDA headquarters in uh, Newton Ards Road there and said, "What's that Fenian doing in our window?" You know, you know. And then he threatened me in the Wellington Arms Hotel, and I was going down like, "You're threatening me." Jesus. I was with Buzz Logan, who is the chronicler of the Shank, great friend of mine. Nobody has published Bud has a great record of the Shank killing the people right through the Troubles. I've never seen a book of that pub. He's dead now again, God rest him, you know. But I was involved, but I was a pacifist. And I was determined that the Ulster people of both sides should know their history. And that's what myself and Ian Adamson, who was the Lord Mayor of Dublin, an independent unionist MP for the Shankill, and a great buddy of mine. Again, Lord rest him, he's dead. But Ian believed totally that the Ulster people should know their bloody culture, not this, you know, simply the best Mickey Mouse shit that Johnny Adair was going on with, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my rant for today.
Well, it's always kind of interesting because I think when people obviously look at your career and the art that you've done, it would be very sort of clear to them that obviously politics, it was as very much part of your life as the likes of your love of Irish mythology, which was evident in it. And I think that whenever you then start following it, like I would have followed you on social media, and especially the likes of something like Twitter and the forum that it gives people, I was actually find it so refreshing to see someone who was just quite happy to express their beliefs without that kind of filter, if you like, because I think that we're kind of living in a society at the moment where people are so guarded and they're very careful about what they would say. But when you do look into whenever you're talking on social media or any interviews that you've done, you always go back to this idea that you have beliefs and morals that you've stood by. And I always find that it was probably most shown when you were talking about the Che Guevara piece, and you did an interview for, I think it was BBC Northern Ireland a long time ago now. I can't remember. I might have got the name of it wrong, but you were questioned in that about if there was another version of reality where you had have chosen with that Che Guevara piece to profit off of it, which for anyone who watching who doesn't know, you made that a kind of copyright free piece. It was free to use for anyone all over the world. And obviously with an image that's been replicated.
You can download it free on my website, High Res.
There we are. There will be links for that down below anyway. Well, one of the things that I find interesting, because I came across you as an artist at the same time where I was learning about art history, and I was learning about kind of contemporary art through the education system at that time. And the people that we were learning about when we were looking at contemporary art were artists like Damien Hirst and artists like Tracy Emin, who I got such a strong dislike of the kind of work that they did. And I found very myself at that point very disillusioned with the art world in general, because I was looking at people who I didn't particularly think were creating pieces of art that were that required much talent. And I thought that it was shock value just to get attention. And at the same time, I was looking at you and I was looking at this artist who said that this is, I have things in my life that are political beliefs of mine. But you backed that up by taking that piece of artwork and not requesting money for it, for letting it to be free to be used to promote an ideal that you believed in. And it was kind of one of those things where I kind of found that you kind of restored my faith in art in general quite a lot, and how true artists can be to what they believe whenever I was looking into those moments. And I've always thought that was one of the things that I would hold your work up to a very high pedestal, but I would also hold you for how you've went through with those things.
I must tell you something. I don't know if you know this, but on my Twitter page for April Fool's Day, I put
I seen this.
and I said, "Great news! Budweiser have decided that they're going to buy the Che Guevara, right? For 10 million. I think it was 10 million. I can't remember, but I think it was 10 million. And and then I put a little caveat underneath that said, and the deal is that because the Super Bowl is coming up, that for the Super Bowl, they're going to have the Che Guevara commercial at halftime, right? And they're all going to wear the symbol on their hat and all the rest of it. And
Uh-huh.
this guy, who I've no idea who he is, did he could do Photoshop, obviously. He put the Budweiser sign on Che's cap and a necklace with Budweiser written on it, right? And put it up. And I thought it was hilarious. Everybody went bananas. It sold out. The Budweiser, Jesus. I was trolled. I was nearly cancelled. I had to say, it's April Fools.
I was amazed because I seen when you came out afterwards and you had to kind of clarify that. So I
I
was
had.
like,
I
how
was
did
about to
people
be
not,
lynched.
how did you not get this? Like, what the hell's going on here?
Che Guevara was a lynch, but I was nearly bloody lynched over that guy, you know?
Definitely. I just couldn't believe that you had to come out and clarify that. It was a little caveat going, you go to a worthy cause, me.
It wasn't all, a lot of the sort of really heavies came on and said, how could you do that, selling out the Budweiser? God almighty.
So one of the things I actually, funnily enough, we were talking last week on this show. I kind of did like a wee episode where it was just me, myself. There was nobody on with me, and I ran through a little section of art news. And one of the things that we talked about was this was right after you launched the new portfolio, which it's your first portfolio there in 40 years.
Right.
And I kind of looked through some of the work when I was on it and just talked about the work, how much I loved it, and these specific versions of it that you've had printed. Where did this project all come about, and could you talk a little bit about how this all began?
It began with my son, Redmond, who runs my website. He lives in LA. My family scattered during the recession here, and my one son is in Galicia in Spain, another one is in Los Angeles, and my daughter's in Milan. But luckily, we have Zoom, we have WhatsApp, we have everything, so we talk. Like I talk all the time. I was talking to my daughter already, and I'm going to ring my son at about 7 or half 7. And he came up with the idea of doing a portfolio inspired, believe it or not, by paper. He managed to get hold of a box by accident of Hahnemühle metallic paper, and he loved it. So he printed a couple of these off, and he sent a couple of copies to me. And I was going like, well, I didn't even know that existed. Now, going back to my career, the fourth Che Guevara I did was the very best one. It's printed on silver foil, and it's known as the psychedelic Che. It's not the famous one, but it's the one I think is one of my best. But seeing these, I was blown away. So he started working on a portfolio of A4 prints, and he designed a cover for them, and it's all beautifully done. He did the whole thing. I just had to write the notes, right? And he knows work inside out. He runs the whole website. He's amazingly familiar. He keeps recording me loads of times, so if anything happens, at least he has it all on tape and on film. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm 18 expert. You know, I'm not going anywhere in a hurry. That away, you know. And
Good. Good.
I should be gone long ago. My father died at 2 and my grandfather at 47. So what I'm doing here, I have no idea. But anyway, I'm very hard to kill.
It's hard to kill a good thing. It's hard to kill a good thing.
I mean, I even knocked myself unconscious in a bike ride and had to get a hip replacement. You couldn't make the crap up I do. Now I'm much more careful. Honest to God, that was only what 3 years ago. But he just knows what he's doing, and he has a great creative streak, which I think is wonderful. And he's also a filmmaker, so he can make little movies of us and all. He does all the ads, he does everything you see. And he's never learned. He's simply self-taught. He's gone on, start do as I do, press all the buttons until you know what's happening, you know? So we just have a WordPress site which anybody can build, right? I'm saying that deliberately so people know it's not that hard. Go to WordPress and you can build what you want virtually. So he came up with it, he's marketing it, and it's been incredible success. It's sold out, literally, you know, over 2 days. The limited edition, now it's an open edition as well, and that's still selling, you know.
I did see one of the things you'd said about it. You had said that you hope that you end up with a copy of it yourself. It was
I
accompanying a
haven't got a
photograph of
copy.
all the portfolios boxed.
I haven't got a copy. Edmund's going to send me.
I need to get you one, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I love going back to publishing, and the fact that we're doing it ourselves is all due to modern new technology. It's incredible what people can do. It's extraordinary, you know.
Yeah, funnily enough, it was because I've looked up your prints before. There were comments actually I'd seen left over. People had left comments on the likes of, you have obviously there's an Etsy store where people can go up and check your prints too, and people had left reviews saying they'd ordered things and actually received more prints than what they'd ordered.
That's I have one. I don't know why. What was I doing? Yes, 2 days ago I printed something to somebody, and I thought, oh, I had to stop myself. I was going to put in two extra prints. I just put in the one. But if somebody rings a bell with comments or something, I don't mean that they're nice to me. I just, if I feel they're interesting, or like this guy was in Belfast, so I sent something of northern interest, shall we say, related to my work, obviously. And I always add small little prints anyway, signed to the person, personally. You buy when it's to Jonathan, Jim, you know what I mean, signed to you. And I like that because the thrill of Jack Kirby, writing his name on my business card, which I have. I have one from Samuel Beckett as well, people like that. And I don't think anything beats it, that little personal touch, and the fact that I can do it for people is brilliant. I love it, Costs nothing.
Exactly. What's absolutely, and then you would imagine that whenever people do go and they've obviously went and purchased the work because they appreciate it, they want to either gift it or have it in their own home, and that little bit of a surprise whenever they open it, that's an amazing thing to be able to give them, and it's certainly then they're going to go and tell that story to people, being like, oh, I ordered this Jim Fitzpatrick print and I ended up with these, and of course that's just another great wee little way to get the word out there.
I think people always appreciate that. I have that sense of mischief. I love just winding things up a bit and making it fun.
Yes, well, April Fool's Day was definitely a good reflection of that one. I think that should become like an annual thing now. There should be the regular yearly Jim Fitzpatrick or April Fool's Day wind up.
Listen, what's that expression my son always says? When you're explaining, you're losing. Well, my God, I've never had to explain something in my life like that. I couldn't believe anybody would take it serious. I would sell the image of Che Guevara to have a Budweiser logo stuck in his cap. Gee. Well, I thought the giveaway should have been when I said that, they were all the dancers were going to dress up as Shea with a bloody Budweiser logo on their caps, Who would believe that?
Anyway, Jim, it has been an absolute privilege sitting here and speaking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us your time. We're going to make a little move here. Got people to go and get ready for the morning, but thank you so much. Anything else that you have coming up that you'd like to talk about? What's next after this portfolio?
We haven't thought about it, but one of the things I would like to do. The problem is when you're talking about Irish patriots, what are you talking about? Your limited view is of the green side of patriotism. What about Henry Joy McCracken, all the great United Irishmen, all the prods who wanted a united Ireland under Irish rule? And they weren't talking about Protestant ascendancy. They were the ascendancy, but they wanted justice. They wanted everything based on the principle of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, all that kind of stuff. And those people, Robert Emmet down south and other prod, Henry Joy, Napper Tandy. Think of what could have happened if they had taken power in Ireland. And the Orange voice, which we hear, was represented immediately, not threatened. So we have to learn to get back to that kind of thinking. That's all, you know. I'd love to welcome a million Protestants into this, into United Ireland. I don't think they'd be too happy about it, though. Not right now, anyway.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Well, anyway, thank you so much for your time. This is Jonathan. This has been the Sketchy AF podcast with the incredible Jim Fitzpatrick. We'll be back again next week. See you then.